this forum wouldn't have been possible without the kind support that Stephen has been showing to the intersex community worldwide. And also my artist friend Zora, whose enthusiasm and energy has brought all the speakers from all around the world connecting with us through Skype. And also the Skype bot, thank God, we are connected through technology. So this panel is about intersex, which is probably not a typical talk that you would go to in the School of Design. Why is this topic important for us as designers and artists of the present and future? It's because gender binary dictation with a legal gender hierarchy puts so many children and adults in shame, humiliation, and abandonment. Intersex is not simply political, but biological and scientific. It is a genetic reality that everyone needs to know. I went to Zora's talk back in November. It was organized by Zoe on behalf of Fashion Department at RCA. Zora's exhibition on masked intersex and her talk at RCA unmasked the ancient deities and intersex identities from early Western culture. Relearning about our past, the past of humanity, was an astonishing moment for me to realize that we're living in an age where the truth is covered. And what we learn about intersex in our cultures is absolutely distorted and biased. I stayed after the talk to chat with Abby, Zora's intersex guest. She's a beautiful, open-minded woman. And I was saddened to hear about her traumatizing experience going through genital operation without her consent as a teenager, losing her job, and forced to be photographed by her doctor after the surgery for education purposes, while her son was never allowed to see the pictures. Zora reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and asked if I could help her to get a lecture room in RCA to bring Stephen Fry and herself to the students and staff at RCA. And I was like, for sure, I genuinely want this to happen because I believe that this talk will be an eye-opening experience as well as an inspiring and educational one to all of us at RCA. I want to thank the enthusiasm from IDE, fashion, design administration that can make this event possibly happen this evening. And those are some side stories. Back to the panel tonight. We are very, very lucky to have Stephen here.
Woo!
He will be talking to us about his new book, Mythos. It's an enthralling retelling of the ancient Greek myth. Today, we will see how the ancient legends unfold and emerge to Zora's 2-year-long residence campaign exhibition, The Mask of Intersex. We will also be hearing from Stephen and River, 2 intersex stand-ups comedians from LA, speaking about their upcoming film and project, Pony Boy. Amazon Jackson, sitting next to me, is a stand-up comedian from Hull. She's traveled all the way to London tonight to be here with us, and she has something very important to share. And we would also like to welcome Zoe. Zoe is the head of fashion department and the head of ID Innovation Design Engineering. We will and also again, I've said that 3 times, thank you guys for being here. And without further delay, RCA, please welcome our beloved Stephen to talk with us.
Thank you so much. This is very good of you, very kind of you. It's lovely to be here. I should explain, I suppose, my relationship to the entire field of intersex studies and intersex life, and that is one purely of immense interest, and I hope sympathy and a passionate engagement in the idea all my life of what it is to be human. And I think, although I'm about to read some little extract from looking back at Greek mythology, I think what's so exciting and urgent about this whole issue is that we're on the threshold of enormous changes to our society that are coming whether we want them or not through technology. Mm-hmm. For example, I often like to begin a lecture I give on the coming tsunami of technological change by saying what I believe to be true and is held to be true by most people in medical science and in related sciences, and that is that the first human being to live to 200 years old has already been born. They're alive on the planet now. Extraordinary changes are coming thanks to genetic engineering and genetic editing, CRISPR, as I'm sure you know, genomics generally, AI, robotics, biological augmentation, nanotube technology. They're all converging at the same time. And also at the same time, our understanding of cognitive science and neuroscience and of our own knowledge of ourselves is showing how contingent and fragile our sense of ourselves is in the modern world. And that so many things we thought were inevitable are clearly not inevitable. The structures of our society, the idea of work and earning, all these are going to be up in the air. And for the last 30, 40 years, as the study of gender has become more and more an accepted and fascinating field of inquiry, thanks to writers, great writers like Judith Butler, for example, we're beginning to understand that not just the cultural nature of gender, but also the biological nature of gender is far more interesting, far more open than we ever imagined. But set aside, this is, of course, a time of great political turmoil and difficulty, particularly in the English-speaking world, shall we say. We're seeing every day that the culture wars have opened up a great Grand Canyon in the United States and to some extent in Europe as well. Each side yelling and screaming at the other and not listening, and the gap getting wider and wider. And as always is the case, it is those on the margins, those living the adventurous, dynamic lives on the margins, whether because of race, culture, or gender, who are the ones who are squeezed out and not listened to. And it seems to me incredibly important that anybody who's interested in what it is to be a human being should be open about the nature of our gender, one of the most basic things that we think we're given. I'm a very cisgender person, there's no question about that. But I'm gay, and I remember what it was like coming out as a gay person and being told that men couldn't marry men and women couldn't marry women. It was inevitable. That's how it was. You have to be really extremely bigoted now to think that. It's so obvious that the world is not threatened by people of the same sex living together in a state that is recognized by their countries and by their society. It's no threat whatsoever. And I think we're beginning to understand as well this idea that people are split down into a binary definition of gender is just simply not borne out by the facts of anybody who's interested in looking at other species of animal and our own species. And given that, I will now, having given that sort of background, I'll tell you about perhaps one of the best known. Her name, he was born male, is Hermaphroditus. I first actually became really interested, intrigued by and stimulated to some extent by the idea of two genders in one, of an intersex being, by the Fellini movie Satyricon, in which there is a genuine hermaphroditic, as they were called then, human who is seen naked in the film. And I watched it when I was 12 or something. I was absolutely astonished. And I said, slightly kind of thrilled. I don't know whether it was an erotic thrill, a social thrill, a spiritual thrill, but I suddenly thought, oh, this is a whole new world opening up. Well, the Greeks, as in so many respects, kind of understood it, and they did the best thing, which is to put it into a narrative. I'll just sort of quote here from the middle of the book. As the men and women of the Silver Age became accustomed to the striving and toiling and suffering that seemed now to be their common lot, so the gods continued to breed. Hermes, who had grown swiftly into handsome but eternally youthful manhood, fathered the goat-footed nature god Pan by the nymph Dryope. Behind the back of Hephaestus and Ares, he also coupled with Aphrodite, a union blessed by the birth of a son of quite transcendent loveliness, named in honor of each parent, Hermaphroditus. This beautiful boy grew up in the shadow of Mount Ida, cared for by the Naiads. There were two Mount Idas, the Cretan one, which was the birthplace of Zeus, and another in Phrygia, Asia Minor, today's Turkish Anatolia, and this was where Hermaphroditus grew up. When he reached the age of 15, he left the Naiads in Mount Ida and went to wander the world. Traveling in Asia Minor, he met one bright afternoon a Naiad called Salmacis, who was splashing in the clear waters of a spring near Halicarnassus. Hermaphroditus, who was as shy as he was lovely, became greatly confused and unhappy when this forward creature, stunned by his beauty, tried to seduce him. Unlike most of her kind, modest, hard-working nymphs who attended with diligence to the maintenance of the streams, pools, and watercourses over which they had charge, Salmacis had a reputation for vanity and indolence. She would rather swim lazily around, admiring her own limbs in the water, than hunt or exercise with the other naiads. But her peace and self-esteem were shattered by the beauty of this Hermaphroditus, and she exerted herself mightily to win him. The more she tried, revolving naked in the water, winningly rubbing her breasts, blowing coy bubbles under the surface, the less comfortable the boy became, until he shouted at her to leave him alone. She departed in a sulky surge, shocked and humiliated by the new and unwelcome experience of rejection. It was a fine day, though, and Hermaphroditus, hot and sweaty from the excitement of fighting off this tiresome sprite and thinking that she was safely out of the way, stripped off his clothing and plunged into the cool waters of the spring to refresh himself. Almost immediately, Salmacis, who had swum back under the cover of the reeds, leapt on him like a salmon and clung fast to his naked body. Revolted, he wiggled and wriggled and jiggled to set free, while she cried up to the heavens, "O gods above, never let this youth and me part. Let us always be one." The gods heard her prayer and answered with the callous literalness that seemed ever to delight them. In an instant, Salmacis and Hermaphroditus did indeed become one. The pair fused into a single body, one body, two sexes. No longer the naiad Salmacis and the youth Hermaphroditus, but now intersex, male and female coexisting in one form. Although the Romans were to regard this state of being as a disorder that threatened the strict militaristic norms of their society, the more open-minded Greeks prized, celebrated, and even worshipped the hermaphroditic gender. Statuary and representations on pottery and temple friezes show us that what the Romans feared, the Greeks seemed to find admirable. In this new state, Hermaphroditus joined the retinue of Erotes, whose nature and purpose was to accompany the god Eros. And I had a footnote here, much thanks to Zora, of course, the great museums of the world have hidden away treasures that represent intersex figures like Hermaphroditus. Many of these have only recently come to light, with exhibitions at the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford and other leading institutions setting a trend for rediscovery of this neglected area. It coincides with a greater society-wide understanding of the fluidity of gender. Anyway, that's what I wrote about Hermaphroditus.
Wow.
And I throw it back to you then. See what you've got to say.
Thank you very much for participating today, given the circumstances, obviously. Really appreciate it. All of us do from the bottom of our heart. The reason why I wanted to get this together is simply because I wanted to connect your book with my recent exhibition, which obviously you've helped narrate at Oxford. It's part of Out in Oxford. It's a project, an app, and a museum tour that's out at the moment, and that anyone can go along to Oxford museums and go on. And what we've done really with this project, I guess, and what you've helped me with, and what I'm so thankful for, is connecting the ancient world and these myths, these stories, with the modern day and the way they've overshadowed people's lives even still today. Fascinating, and what I loved about this project, and in a way we both discovered at the same time, was that in ancient Greece, as you've said, there was a real adoration, and a very well-reported, well-documented adoration of intersex form figures in statues and in other forms of art. And they really do, beyond that, there's writers, ancient writers, lots of ancient writers. You know, we've got loads of proof. You've helped me narrate that and put down who those writers were. I mean, you know, Macrobius, you know, Theophrastus, Ovid. It's just so fascinating how there's a very marked visual documented change in the status of, for example, this figure, this intersex figure, Hermaphroditus, from Greece to Rome. Not only going through, like the Gali, which is the clergy of the intersex goddess Agdistis in ancient Greece, who's the mother goddess of Romans, who's never really spoken about. You know, we've really got to open up conversation on her, Agdistis, but then also her epithet in Rome, who was called Cybele, and she had clergies who were non-binary, for definite, is the way we can describe them. And you know, these fragments of history have been, as we can tell now, deliberately concealed from public view, and museums, unfortunately, are still, unfortunately to this day, presenting a very black and white view of the gender of gods in the Greek and Roman empires, firstly, and secondly, the human genders expressed in the ancient Greek and Roman empires, which are obviously very foundational and pivotal to our own. And what's interesting to me is, and I want to touch upon this with you now, and this is how we're going to bring in our next speaker, Steve Seven Graham and also River, is the fact that in ancient medical records, intersex people are very well documented as well. And we've got doctors, you know, giving us very detailed reports to intersex babies being operated on in Greece and in Rome, but also intersex babies being part of religious ceremonies where they were being drowned as part of this kind of myth that was going around that Greek waters feminized these Greek men, and that actually in Greece what was happening was that these men were going into these pools at the Gallus River, and they were becoming feminized by the water nymphs there, like Salmacis, who obviously appears in your Ovid story, you know, Ovidian inspired story. And this, it was like a full-blown paranoia, wasn't it, in Rome, of water and related to feminization of men.
It's very interesting, and even where it was not a physically determined intersex characteristics, the Greeks very often in certain, on the island of Crete, for example, it was very common for it to be necessary for the male youth to be fully feminized for right up until the end of their puberty, and that they weren't considered a full man until they had experienced a culturally female state at the very least, and that the Greeks generally had this much more, it seems to me, adult and informed view of gender than the Romans. And of course, I suppose what it makes one wonder is, where did the Romans see, and where does our culture see, intersex identity as a threat? What is it that is being threatened? I mean, are we still sure that somehow church and state are so solid and so firm that they're going to be rocked by the idea of something so clear and obvious and natural? It is something that needs asking, because as so often in these cases, the problem is with those who can't accept, not with those who you know, and that was always the case. I can remember as a gay man being told, we've got nothing against it, we just wouldn't want our children to suffer from the bigotry that's out there in the world, you know, as if being protective. So I wonder what you felt was, what do you feel in your personal life, and also just looking at the history that you've studied so importantly, what do you felt that the Romans regarded as the threat? Was it to do with their militarism?
I personally think it was a combination of things. I think every empire has inbuilt procreation power and lawyers, because obviously they want the biggest amount of armies, it's their protection around them, the most amount of men fighting and the most amount of women at home having children and creating the next generations. They used their people like flocks of sheep to some degree, didn't they? You know, and or even use references of sheep in their kind of marketing ploys, I think, in a way. But I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's a combination of things. The truth of the matter is that intersex deities did enter into Rome. They had been specifically held out of Rome, and they'd imported all the other gods, hadn't they? And then renamed them, changed their order. But they specifically didn't bring in Agdistis because of her, the fact that she was both male and female at once, but she was a parthenogenic virgin mother goddess who didn't need males to reproduce. She just did, and she's obviously a very important figure. And then obviously Hermaphroditus. Now those two both came in to the Roman Empire in 2004 BC during the Second Carthage War, at a time of desperation. Rome won the war. They were absorbed into the pantheon of gods then, and they were celebrated for being protectors of Rome. Now this is fascinating information, I think, that no one really knows about our history, particularly when what was being absorbed into Rome was non-binary, transgender and intersex identities, and androgyny, you know, which in itself, that word androgyny is a Greek word, isn't it? And people were actually recognised in the Hippocratic Corpus, which is a foundry, seminal medical manual in the Greek Empire, that then spilled over into Rome, definitely. And Hippocrates, obviously, what he, as we know in what we've done for Oxford, he basically listed human gender as being on a scale. It wasn't a black box and a white box. Hippocrates saw human gender as being 6 main gender markers of sex. Yes, predominantly around male and female categories, but he saw that there was 3 grades of male, 3 shades, the middle male being called the androgyny, and then on the other side of the scale, going out, androgyny female, and then going out to the most feminine female on the end of the spectrum. Now, it's proof there, isn't there, that in the ancient world, even in medicine, they identified intersex people as androgynes, and then later, hermaphrodites. Now, I want to bring in my friend now, who's not only just my friend, she's also one of my greatest muses, Seven, who is so many things, actually, and is so gifted in so many things. And this is the thing that I want to put across to this as well, is that intersex people have lots of gifts. They're multi-talented, all the people that I've met. And I would like to bring her in now, because I've helped expose this history that was isolated to her, that was hidden from them. And I want to know now how they feel about having this history unmasked, and how this is going to hopefully help us move forward as a movement, as an entire section of society is saying this is not good enough. We're not allowing genital mutilation of intersex children anymore. This has got to stop. People have got to have a choice. People need to know the truth about history and the modern age, about biology and science. So how do you feel, Seven, about this history being exposed? How are we going to move forward with this now?
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say is just that I remember so clearly that initial conversation we had when you started digging into the history of the Greeks and the Romans, and we had a really long phone conversation that was just so entrancing to me and gave me such... I can't describe the feeling, because as an intersex person, I'm sure other intersex people will relate to this, we are so invisible in society globally that we have no mirrors to look in and no sense of who we are. And when you first met me, I was Sarah Graham. I was female in my pronouns. I was still very closeted, really. I'd written one article, The Secret of My Sex, I believe, but I was still in the shame, you know. we have been deliberately excised from society. I had surgery on my body when I was 8 years old that removed my testes. My parents were told I had ovaries that were going to become cancerous and had to be taken out. That was a lie. And I actually discovered at Keck's Medical School last weekend, when I attended a lecture and spoke to the doctors there, that now with modern IVF treatments, those testes could have actually been fertile and I might have actually biologically been able to have a child. So the trauma still unfolds and the pain of what was done to me still unfolds, and I'm still healing that. And it's still very painful at times. I've done a lot of healing work. I've been in recovery from my drug and alcohol addiction that nearly killed me for 16 years. I've had access to the best treatment resources in the world, like 3 months trauma therapy at the refuge in Florida, and I'm still healing it. But that conversation, coming back to that and to the topic in hand, that conversation just awakened something in my heart to know that we have always existed, and that there was a time when we were actually venerated and actually seen as special, not seen as evil and so ugly that our bodies couldn't be allowed to exist, that people actually carved our bodies into marble, was staggering to me at that point. And I think also it's so interesting to know that the Roman culture started, and as Stephen pointed out, with their patriarchy and their militarism, that they had to get rid of intersex and they had to stop people worshipping us because we are actually the bridge between the sexes, and they needed to make more rigid the male and female polarity and the control over women's bodies, which they turned us into breeding machines, as you said. And Stephen, just hearing your writing, you're such a beautiful writer, and so hearing you bring your great intellect to this topic with your historical knowledge and, as you say, interest in humanity, again, I can't tell you how much my heart loves you for doing this. And no, seriously, I know that you've devoted a lot of time and thought to this, and I'm so grateful to you for doing that, because it helps restore some self-worth and self-esteem to know that we've got an historical context, and to know that there is hope of us actually being seen for the gifts that we bring. You pointed out that the intersex people you've met have special talents. Well, one of the reasons why we're interesting to modern day science is because people with my particular intersex condition, androgen insensitivity syndrome, have two strange quirks that the doctors want to get to the bottom of. One, we tend to have very good skin and age slowly. You can imagine the billions that could come from unlocking why that is. And also, we tend to be very above average intelligent, if not very intelligent. I've actually lost 10 IQ points from my teenage binge drinking. I'm still reasonably bright. So that, again, is something that's very interesting to the doctors. Why are intersex people so intelligent, and why do they age more slowly? Yeah. Anyway, I'd also like to introduce River, and River and I only just met last week. He is an amazing creative man. He's a writer, actor, director, and he's working on his new film, Pony Boy. And you are going to be the world's first out intersex actor playing an intersex character. So again, this is the next generation who are going to take us into the mainstream.
Thank you. Actually, when we met last week and she told me that my film and that this would be a historic moment for the intersex community of being the first intersex actor and director, I was like, that's impossible. Like, it's not possible. And we did our research, and we just literally have had no visibility. And for my particular journey, I think I denied my intersexness I found out that I was intersex when I was 12, but at the time I wasn't even told I was intersex. I was told that I was just born without testicles, and that I would have to start taking testosterone therapy for the rest of my life to go through puberty. When I was 16, I had prosthetical testes implanted in me without my consent or without my decision. And nowhere in there was there an offer to start seeing a therapist or to start mental health treatment at all. So it was a lot of an internal journey to discover what I needed most for myself. And I think most intersex people would agree that it's very lonely. It's incredibly lonely. And so to meet Seven and to meet all of you that are doing this incredible work to bring us to light. It's really humbling, and it's really just it touches me in a way that I never would have dreamed as a 12-year-old, holding the secret that I couldn't tell my friends, didn't want to talk to my family about, and to now create art from it and have discussions internationally about it. It's so exciting. It just feels like we're on this frontier of the next movement. It really just feels like we're onto something that's just so incredible and amazing, and just I would never have. I'm speechless, really.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you with us, River. Thank you so much for joining us. And isn't it really fascinating how you've been through a procedure to binaryize your body without your consent? And this is an ongoing theme, unfortunately, with a lot of intersex people I've been speaking to, and it amuses for my work. And what I think is really fascinating by that as a cultural norm that's become is that we only see there's two options. It's just black or white. So it's the mask layer that is the most important, and it's a binary mask that is constantly being pushed onto people, whether they like it or not. Giving you testimony on...
Even the most liberal so-called parents historically have, who have actually at least informed their children that they're intersex, have still said, what we'll do is we'll wait till you get to the age where you can choose which gender to be. So they still think there's a fork, a branch, where you must choose one path, that you can never maintain both for the rest of your life, which surely is ideal. And in fact, really is to be envied. It was an extraordinary experience to have. I mean, of course, everyone can sympathise with the shame, the stigma, the ignorance, our imaginations take us to school days and showers and all these, normal everyday experiences. Bad enough to go to a shower when you're a teenager. So much of your body to be, but the idea of being looked at and commented on as some kind of freak must be, I don't know how. I mean, the courage and extraordinary, self-possession that you would require in order to get through your life like that. But, the idea is for the world to recognise that actually to contain both is an extraordinary gift. And it's not surprising there are other gifts that go with it, whether cognitive or gifts of particular beauty and so on. It is about artists and filmmakers and all kinds of people, just allowing people, and I think anyone with imagination would think what a gift it was to contain both identities. Not to have favour one or say, I'm really more of a woman than I am a man. I mean, that's... To have an identity where that is meaningless and where you can actually contain both is an extraordinary privilege, and it should be recognised.
Well, I thought it was fascinating what you sent me, Stephen, an email about in Mexico. Recently you sent me the article of there's a third sex they do recognise in Mexico. Is it the muses?
That's right. That's right. And of course, in the South Seas, famously in French Polynesia, Tahiti, and places like that, it's a very common for those. Again, this is a cultural third sex rather than the actual specific, biological intersex. But it's still very strong that there is a whole intermediate group. And if you go to Tahiti, places like that, you will see they typically work in the service industries because they are considered as a kind of good luck and a kind of blessing, which is something you referred to earlier. So it is this sense of a blessing. And after all the things, cultural things that make society, have made society object, militarism, colonialism, and so on, are all things that now, the best of us realise are not great human attributes. That in fact, it is the worst of us, the conquering territorial aspects of humanity that need the genders to be fully separated.
And
we can recover from
this is
Yes, so go on, Seven.
I just wanted to say, I think this is why you're right, Stephen. I mean, you pointed out the technological changes, but I think in terms of culture, we are at this absolute pivotal point. In a way, you know, young people get non-binary. Young people are challenging gender and don't want to be constrained by those labels because they've had that experience of being able to create themselves on social media, through social media, play computer games where they can play different genders and all of that stuff. And they just don't have that Piscean mindset that we were raised with. They've got the Aquarian age mindset. But at the same time, we see this very reactionary, right-wing, Christian-led move to try and tie the gender binary back down. And this is why young people are going to lead us forward and change things. And, you know, what you're saying about the different bodies, children actually at kindergarten age, you know, they will accept anything because everything is new to them. The idea that our bodies are not acceptable, that comes from grown-ups who point things out and say, oh, that's weird or that's not okay. If we created the space for non-binary people in society by having the films, the Netflix series, you know, Stephen's book, all of these different areas of art that we need to influence and start telling these stories so everybody in the world knows that intersex people exist, then the doctors have the scalpels taken out of their hands because they can't say to the parents, oh, don't worry, we don't know what the sex is now, but we can fix this. This child is a disorder of sexual development. We'll sort it out for you and put them into one or the other box. We'd have the space where the parent could say, no, my child's intersex. They're fine as they are. They're going to grow up and be an extraordinary human being. Who knows who they're going to be? They're going to invent themselves.
Yes. Definitely. You know, I mean, and as we can see, you know, there's a socio-political conspiracy here in history. This has been building. This hasn't come out of the blue. And when someone like Piers Morgan turns around and says that the idea of someone identifying as both male and female in one and non-binary, that only male and female identities exist, he's scaremongering, and also he's talking from a historical and biological point of view that is a lie. Because in history, we've seen there's been biological spectrum identified in Hippocratic Corpus, medical manual, all the way through, and also through the religious factions of the Greek and Roman empires, and also in our own world, you know, around us. Like Stephen's pointed out, in different cultures around the world, in every part of the world, it is normal and biological to expect that some of the people are going to be born biologically intersex, some of them are going to be born transgender, some of them are going to be gay, some of them are going to be bisexual, some of them are going to be, you know, lesbian, and some of them, the majority, of course, will be heterosexual.
Yeah.
But there's biological diversity.
Exactly, and anyone of intelligence can see that the gene pool benefits from having these outliers. The ones, yes, you need the ones who go off and plant the fort or kill the animals or, you know, protect the homestead. You need the alpha males, and you need the, you know, the lumpen other ones, but you need the artists, the outliers, the the maverick, the transgressive, the
shamans
benefited from that. If no one can see that, then really they're suggesting only the most brave new world kind of a society in which nothing would change and no boundaries would be pushed for the future generations, and that's just stupidity.
Yes. Well, there's an historical point which I'd like to raise. When I was writing my play last year, Angels Are Intersex, I went and I spoke to experts from all of the major religions, and I was fascinated to discover that in Judaism they had 6 genders that were recognised, including one specifically for my intersex condition. Also, within the Muslim faith, historically, intersex people were honoured and were allowed to sit in the mosque between the men and the women. They had their own special place, so they literally were the bridge between the sexes until the religion became more kind of autocratic and patriarchal. So, you know, we've got these other historical roots. I think, though, that this is an interesting time because in some ways there are echoes of 1930s Germany in terms of the progressiveness and the changes that are going on. But at the same time, we also have a potential dictator on our hands. So I think we like Transparent did so well in terms of recreating what happened in Germany. We need to be very careful and very mindful that we are literally at a turning point where it could go in either direction. We could move into the wonderful new technological world where human diversity and culture and being yourself and an individual is celebrated, or we could have a very reactionary Handmaid's Tale kind of Christian dictatorship.
Can I just put in there, please? Because how we all intersex person, you know, wasn't actually spoken, but has made this meeting now
the central point of her life. And I must speak because what I've got to say is killing me.
Come in, Amazon. Come in. We love you. Speak.
Everything that you guys have just said is completely related to my brain. And things that Stephen has added has like gone, oh my word, wow, that does relate to me as an intersex, non-binary human, miscategorised by our incorrect doctors. I am the intersex lie. I am the dark disease body that makes you the area of the non-binary as the dark disease body, because the difference is what I am going to explain in my very important speech now that I just have to get out of myself. I just have to get it out. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to go with it.
Go with it.
Oh.
Go with it.
Here we go. Let's change the world. Give it a go.
Let's go. You follow.
Okay. Hello. My name is Amazon Jackson. Legally, I have changed that by default, and that was in the interest of intersex awareness. That's the only reason I changed my name to Amazon, because my name was Angela Michelle King. That is who I identify as inside, basically, who I am. Okay? Right, here we go. I'm here today to speak about what it's like to be an intersex person in 2018. For me to answer that in an open and honest way, I would have to describe myself in the linear order by which the doctors of this society have classified me as a human being since birth. So, according to my now new revealed medical records, I am, by their definition, a binary female, non-binary female, genetically intersex, non-binary female. For me to put that title into context of any meaning, you all have to take out of your head straight away that I am the comedian that you think I am. This is actually the truth of what's going on in our world today. I will now present to you evidence that qualifies such an identity. These copies from my medical records were handed to me instead of the actual document I had originally requested to bring to this meeting today. That's the only reason this has come to light, because of this meeting. Here is the first part of what I like to call the greatest social injustice of not only our time, but against the whole concept of human existence itself. Now you can understand why I have to get this out. I will now briefly outline copies of my personal medical records in the interests of public health and greater social awareness. Because as a former professional of this society myself, I was trained as a family support worker to demonstrate open and honest communication across all levels of interagency liaising as I strove to protect the rights of vulnerable children experiencing homelessness. That's what I did when I was the female lied to. Okay. It's a lot for me to get out, but I'm going to get it all out in this one speech. Okay, I now invite my former colleagues to join me, not only the doctors and nurses who I worked alongside in my former role, but the ones I feel I have no choice but to name in my efforts to do right by the many, many miscategorised children who are being placed inside the life of an intersex lie. That is what is happening in our society. By naming you here today, doctors, I am giving you the opportunity to come forward in an effort to reshape our human understanding of existence in a male-female binary society that a lot of us feel this world no longer needs. Why are you protecting it? So I will start, as I said, by reading you the first letter I was incorrectly given, and I challenge you as the professional members of this society, as doctors and experts, to come forward and submit your contributory or contradictory evidence depending on how strongly you feel about the ethical choices you are being forced to make every day. Choices that you understand defy your basic hypocritic oaths. Choices that general medical councils and governments around the world are insisting should define our identities as human beings. Okay, here we go.
Amazon, can you... I absolutely understand your anger at the specific doctors, and I went through that very much too, especially as I saw the world eminent gynecologist. He was the guy who wrote the manual on gynecology and obstetrics, and I was in his book, so I totally understand this anger against specific doctors. But what I would say to you,
completely different. He's not lying to me, but this doctor is lying to the full world, because what
I know, but what I
inside an intersex lie. That's what they've done to me.
Okay, I understand that. What I would say...
Get this out of 7, and then talk to me at the end of it, and I don't care about naming these.
Well, I know, and it's your right to do that if you really want to do that. But I think in a way this is much bigger than those individual doctors. They're just part of a global system that does this, and so the right place to take that is we can work through Intersex UK and other pressure lobbying organisations to present this as evidence for the case against the NHS doing this kind of surgery to us, and that will have real effect in terms of your local health authority. This forum, we need to keep more of a global perspective, because this is happening everywhere, and thousands of doctors around the world are involved in this, and we can't name them all. And also, they're part of a system, and we need to change the system, not just the individual mindset of the doctors. So please, as another intersex person to you, I say I understand that anger, I understand that passion, but let's take that and put it in a forum where we can actually get some change in your local area, rather than do that here and now. I think we need to keep the focus on the big picture and how we can change things positively.
Well, what I'll do then is I will keep it anonymous, and if at the end of what I've finished saying you do feel it is important, because of what I am actually saying here, that these professionals do need to come forward and say, well, this is why I lied to this person, this is why I didn't lie to her parents or anything, this is why I lied to this person, which then lied to the world.
What I would say to you is
don't let me name anyone then, but
why don't you just
get this out?
Okay, well, you need to get out certain things, but just speak from your heart and keep it simple, and just tell us how it's affected you.
Okay, right. So let's start with letter 1 then. I won't name anybody in it, but what I will say is that this is how I found out that I was intersex. Well, no, actually, this isn't how I found out I was intersex. This is the letter that first acknowledges between doctors that I was intersex, okay? Okay, this is to one of my previous actual doctors from a local gynaecologist, academic department of obstetrics gynaecology. Thank you for sending this delightful young woman along to the gynaecology clinic. To my amazement, at age 30 I was at this point, to my amazement, she was unaware of the diagnosis that had been made when she saw this other person back in 2003, which was like 4 years previous. It has been well established that she has a male karyotype of 46XY, despite the fact she has a uterus, her FSH is raised, and her oestradiol low, as might be expected. I hope I broke the news to her gently. No, you didn't do that, because you didn't actually break the news to me at all, did you? Because this is the problem. She had arrived with her long-term partner and wanted to talk about reproduction. We therefore spoke a little about donated oocytes, or I don't even know that word. But I think there is plenty to do before we get to considering this. Yeah, or telling me that, you can't actually naturally reproduce. That would have been a good one right there. Not, let's see what it said back in 2003 about these small ovaries that you've got, woman presenting to me. I've arranged for blood to be taken to check once more her hormone status. I've also arranged for a bone density scan, because she is hypoestrogenic, and an MRI scan to see if any gonads. Can we just all say that word together to see if we know what it means? Gonads. What does that word mean to you? To me, that's
gonads.
It is, isn't it, though, Seven? That's a very masculine word in our society.
Yeah, it's a horrible word when you hear it the first time, and it's a very shocking word when you hear it the first time. It's a really ugly word.
Yeah, and that's why he wasn't prepared to say it to my face, only to my GP at the time. They had my back. Why would he have possibly done that? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. I shall write to this certain geneticist at a different hospital and arrange for a genetic appointment for her and hope to see her again in the clinic in due course. So that's the first letter.
Okay, Amazon. We're very, very lucky to have Stephen with us today, and we haven't got him for very long. And I think there's a lot of content and information in those letters, and I'm very happy. I'm very happy to go through those letters with you when we're not here all together. But I think we need to really go through that with a fine-tooth comb and put together a case for you. And now is not the time to do that. So
I've not got any case. I've not got any case. All I'm trying to point out is a basic honest truth, which I want to get out in one very important sentence. Okay?
Yes.
What he said to me that day, and what these letters prove, is that what's presented to me as the non-binary female as part of that six-gender spectrum, the dark disease body, which made all you other intersex people dark and diseased, because I was the one who had an invisible killer cancer that would never have been detected by Dr. Hippocrates. He would have seen me as one of these six gender area spectrums of people. I would have been then classed as a non-binary female, because I didn't fall in the typical binary of females. I was a female, but I didn't have ovaries that he didn't know about. He just knew that I looked different from all the other binary females. I was a bit taller, I had my own maverick abilities, the results of me being born, in fact, have been because my parents were actually creating a very much illegal love child because of the fact that they loved each other so much, then gave me both their names. I don't know if I say this is not a coincidence, Angela Michelle, Angela Michael. I've become this sort of dark, diseased, intersex body that will actually kill me, probably in childhood or early infancy, early adulthood, unless it's sort of nowadays diagnosed in infancy through a genetic test of this 46XY. Parasite that they've now identified but wouldn't tell me about in the right context. They have to get together in a team to break it to me as a rare type of my individual part of feminism that included these cancerous sort of ovarian malignant risk that needed to move.
Well, that's a very good point you make, and it's one of the common stories that they say to people with a whole range of different intersex conditions is that they need to remove these bits of our body because they're going to become cancerous, and it's a lie. In my case, they took my testes, and actually the chance that my testes would have become cancerous is less than the chance of my breast becoming cancerous or any cis woman's breast becoming cancerous. So that would be like cutting out all breasts. In the teenage years, because one day you might get breast cancer. It's a complete lie, and it's a fabrication designed to keep the bodies one or the other. So, go on, River.
In my case, the doctors told me that I needed to start taking testosterone, because if not, that I could develop cancer. But then what I realized is if I chose to start identifying as a woman, I could have started taking estrogen when I was 12, or whenever I decided to. So I could have had that choice, but the doctors said this cancer lie, and that testosterone would have to start in order to prevent cancer, which is a lie.
Yeah, and that's common to all of us.
The difference, what I just have to point out here is that what you guys have got, I'm sure, is a visual type of intersex. Doctors was able to pull you out of your mother's womb, look at your fingers and toes and say, oh, we've got one of these non-binary humans here. Is that how it was with you guys? Because with me, it was literally, I was pulled out of my mother's womb. The doctor counted my fingers and toes, looked at my labia, whatever a doctor needs to do to visually see that is a female sex, and then classified me as such from birth. So then I grew up with this hidden cancer malignant risk inside me that wasn't even detectable from birth. It was only detectable at the point of me approaching age 30, when it should have been told to me age 26.
Yes.
When it should have been told to me age 15.
Yes.
How did I not die of this before now? And, you know, where they're not raising awareness of this, there was a simple genetic test at birth in children that says you've got a hidden, invisible, malignant risk.
Yes.
How can we possibly investigate how to heal it? We're hiding it.
This is a trope of intersex people. It's a constant recurring theme in everyone that I've spoken's lives that have been operated on, being operated on without consent, being lied to about certain things. I think it's time now, isn't it, for us as a society to talk openly about this, to give people choices, and consent is really the key word here. Everything has to be done by consent. Thank you so much for all of you talking and giving us your points of view. Stephen, I know that you've been with us for nearly an hour, and I'm obviously conscious about keeping...
I do have to pop off, I'm afraid. I'm going to be somewhere. It's 11:50 in the morning here in Los Angeles, and I've got to be somewhere at 12:50, so I'm going to nip into my car and get away. But I wanted to thank you all for telling your stories and to express, you know, huge admiration for what you've gone through, and at least the hope that it is, as Seven said, it is the time. It is the time culturally and technologically, scientifically and biologically for us to understand this whole issue, because informed consent and curiosity and education are going to be the keys here. And I think in the same way that in the 1950s, which is the decade when I was born, homosexuality was classified by the American Psychiatric Society as a disorder. And things do change. It's never fast enough for a human lifetime. You wish that it wasn't always 3 steps forward and 2 back. But, you know, better is good.
Yes.
Better is still good. It isn't, you know, we mustn't let, as the phrase has, you know, the good be the enemy, you know, perfect be the enemy of good. It won't be perfect in our lifetimes, but it might be better. There might be more acceptance than there was. It might be in the conversation more than it was. And it'll never be enough for those of us who would like to see the, you know, the sunlit uplands and the golden city shimmering, welcoming us where everything is perfect. But we can keep it in our heads and do it for the next generation and the generation after that. Yes. And this kind of meeting, this kind of conversation is just one of those tiny little steps forward. And I'm so excited to have seen you all. And darling Zora, thank you for involving me. And good luck to you all. And thank you.
Thank you
very much.
And very good luck with your book. Everybody go out and buy Stephen's book, Mythos. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Similarly, River, I know you've got to go quite soon because Shado's got to take you somewhere. Is there something else that you'd like to say before we have to shoot off?
I think something that, I guess with Stephen's passage of reading his book that we didn't talk on, is I think there's a large spiritual component to intersex people and to the movement that's happening. It feels, I don't know.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. There's a lot of like history of like intersex people having shamanistic powers, and I know a lot of like you do Kundalini. I have a spiritual practice and as well, and I think there's something that intersex people have like are gifted in a kind of like a
I agree. No,
spiritual,
absolutely.
psychic sense as well, and yeah.
The first thing I heard about that was the Native Americans who viewed intersex people as two spirits, and they saw us as the best warriors and the best healers.
Right.
And that gift of healing is very much a gift that's spiritually based, as well as kind of them having the intelligence to work out the medicinal herbs and all of that kind of stuff. So it's been to the detriment of the world that intersex people have been oppressed and our bodies have been chopped up, so that we've been too ashamed to be who we are and not in our power. But now we are taking our power back, and it was so great to hear your powerful testimony, Amazon. I know what it's like.
It hurts me so much when I hear stories of actually what I don't identify as.
I know. Well, I
had no reason to identify with you people from birth. It wasn't until the age of 30.
Yes.
And I was told this lie that I'm an intersex person when I look at my medical records I had a malignant risk of ovarian cancer. That's what these letters sort of say.
And that may or may not be true, because that was what was said to me. That could just be the spin doctor justification.
But I mean, what I'm saying is the difference between me and you is mine was never ever going to be detectable. You had these malignant risks removed because they saw it as such.
Well, they were
never could have seen it, so it was just going to be. I would have died from it if I'd never approached myself.
Well, maybe you'd have been perfectly fine and your body would have produced hormones naturally. This unfortunately is one of the big lies.
Hypocritic oath, because what they're doing, Seven, is they're sort of saying to me, through these letters, is once we're okay to tell you it's intersex and we know you're mentally okay, we'll then put across this story to you as cancer.
Yes.
And we'll then make you adopt it as an intersex lie.
I know.
Because we don't know what it is. That's what the doctors are saying.
If you say...
I've had it, because we don't want to classify this their gender of non-binary.
If you
That's
say...
what these letters are sort of saying.
Absolutely, and if you say to parents, if we don't operate on your child, they might get cancer, what parent is going to stand up to that doctor and say, no, do not operate on my baby or my young child, because this is going to create lifelong trauma? Any parent is going to think they're saving their child's life, as my parents did. They thought that they were so relieved and so grateful to the doctors, thinking, well, thank goodness they've caught this and they can take these testes out. Sorry, take these ovaries out. They weren't even told they're testes, and the child will be okay. But that story made me think I should have died when I was a teenager, and I felt like I've got the Grim Reaper over my shoulder my whole life, stalking me. And that was a big part of my addiction, thinking, well, I might as well live fast and die young, because I was supposed to die when I was a teenager anyway. So these medical stories are incredibly damaging to us. And let's not forget, through the fantastic work... Just one second, Ela Xora. Through the fantastic work of Intersex UK and Ella and other intersex people, the United Nations last year actually condemned the UK and Nepal for the torture of intersex babies and children, the state-sponsored torture of intersex babies and children, by allowing these operations to happen. So the moral case is irrefutable. We are going to stop this surgery. I think when we get a series on Netflix, when Pony Boy River's film is in the cinemas and people actually hear our stories and see what's been done to us and the effect it's had on us, I think any sensible person will turn around and say this has got to stop. But the first job we have is to educate the public that we exist. And that's why it's so important to go back in history and know we've always existed, we're not going away, and doctors need to put down their scalpels now.
Exactly. And this...
Sorry. that's my soapbox moment.
To move forward, is Zoe around with a microphone or not?
She's here.
Yep. I just wondered, from a fashion point of view, how you have interpreted the exhibitions that I've done at RCA, this historical information that has been verified by Stephen and lots of other now plasticists around the world talking about this subject. How do you think it's going to inspire your students? Also, how do you think it can reflect on fashion?
Hey,
hey, hello.
Well, that's a mighty question.
Can I just interrupt and say I've actually got like an 8-hour journey back to Hull now. So am I alright to sort of leave you guys to it?
Absolutely, Amazon. Go.
Well, and I acted like a misguided doctor, basically. I looked at something I didn't understand and thought, well, I'll try and give it a good crack.
Don't worry, you did great, and your passion and commitment shone through.
Amazon. Round of applause for Amazon.
Yay!
Thank
Woo!
you.
Go Amazon!
Zoe, my darling.
Okay, Zora, I have to say, I think as much as I would love to answer your question, I'm not anywhere near as informed as you guys. I think we've come to the end of the time that we have here. But I think, for me, just really privileged to have you in my life, even though it came through email in a bizarre way, and that you've come through the RCA 2 or 3 times now. And the power that you have to bring people together to share their stories, and for us to learn, for us all to learn, be aware of not just your story, but the fact that you always bring it with this phenomenal kind of history that shows, I think Stephen used the word about civilization and our humanness, and we are in this time of reveal, of us understanding much more our deep truths of who we are. And it's been really precious to hear all of your stories and us to be all completely connected. And even the support that you're giving Amazon in her kind of emotional state is really, it's really touching and really brilliant to hear. So I mean, I've been sort of left here on my own. I was abandoned. So it's been really super cool. And I mean, Stephen Fry's book Mythos is amazing. And from my perspective, interestingly, the sense of what history was and who we are now, as much as we're going into this kind of technical age that Stephen talked about, we're sort of in this in-between. And so for me, I'm fascinated by the fact that our past is as important at revealing who we deeply are. And it's really key. And so your power of what you've done up in Oxford and sort of all that knowledge has been amazing. So I think probably now we just need to say a huge thank you to all three of you. It was all five of you that become three. And I think it would be great if you guys let us know when Ponyboy is being aired.
Yes. We're actually right now in our fundraising campaign. So if you maybe if anyone's interested to learn more, to support, maybe Charlotte could put us in contact.
I have actually attached a link to the email that is distributed to everyone this morning through this group design. And
thank you.
I watched the trailer, and I would say that this is something that I'm really looking forward to. I think as artists and designers, we are here to celebrate diversities and to support each other through learning and making stuff. I hope that the art that we're making and the stories that we've shared today can empower more people to come out of the fears and to be able to discover self-redemption, self-love, and self-liberation. I think that's something that's even beyond the topic of the talk today. It's way beyond, it's beyond the topic of intersex, but it's so much more.
It's about being human, I think, or like learning more about that.
For me personally to put myself into the shoes of an person who has intersex conditions. It's so fundamentally different to be living in shadow for so long. Before we head up, is there anybody who would like to come and ask the question to these guys? Well, I'm assuming that you don't have anything to ask. Sorry, I should have asked you before. You have to come all the way up here and ask.
I can pass it.
I will pass the microphone. Yeah. The other thing I just would like to say is thank Charlotte for organising this.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Great to see her.
Thank you.
Just really having met you, Zora, and having heard the story, just really take it as a force for her to really want this to happen. Come.
Hi. Thanks a lot for everything. And just one question that got into my mind was about when Stephen was mentioning the notion of containing two identities. I was wondering how much this kind of phrasing things is something that you do relate to, or that is still to a certain extent problematic in the sense of, do we still need to talk about this duality in that sense? Can we talk about intersex as still beyond this two? I don't know, things that we mentioned also about queer theories, and what I think is amazing about it is just this thing of trying not to label, and how can we move forward from that, and having the word from you, thinking these notions is something that I think could be great to hear.
Would you like to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's still a lot of work that I'm doing to kind of untie the binary within myself, specifically with my movie, actually. Through the script process, up until last week, actually, up until before meeting 7, in my script, I had said that Ponyboy was a queer person. And then an intersex activist commented on a picture that we posted on Instagram, and they asked, "Is this an intersex film?" And then I was like, "Wait a minute. If I'm an intersex director and an intersex actor, why did I kind of like say that he was queer as opposed to just saying outright that he was intersex?" And so and then now we're with my director and stuff, we're kind of like reworking the script to make the intersex narrative a through line and part of the whole thing. But I guess to answer your question is that there is a lot of work that I'm doing still to embrace my intersex entirely holistically within myself. In my expression, I've always been like, wore makeup sometimes, or sometimes didn't, or sometimes like how I dressed, it kind of like blurred the lines always. So I think yeah, but to the way I spoke about my identity has always been something that has been a little bit of a struggle. Sometimes I think visual expression is a little bit easier to kind of just blur those lines, but to outright tell people that you're intersex, that's still something that I'm getting used to, and it's still the work that I personally have to do in my own identity journey.
I think that's I mean, it's really nice to hear that, River, because I identify with that. It's kind of, I identified as queer first and came out as lesbian when I was 18, and actually went through a lesbian separatist period, but then discovered that I had these testes and XY chromosomes when I was 25, and that really problematized my female identity. And kind of, I was so lucky to know the artist and filmmaker Derek Jarman, because he really helped me to understand heterosoc, the normalization of heterosexuality and queer culture, and as I started working on that in my head. And in terms of your original question, I had a female body when I was a kid, and I really struggled to see myself as female because my brain was definitely male. But when I started taking testosterone, ironically, this is a paradox, I started to feel more female. And what I've been doing in the last 18 months is really synthesizing the male and the female. And I'm still at a stage where the boy inside me, and there was very much a little boy in terms of inner child work, the boy inside me is still really angry because he was pushed into a box and ignored for so many years. And that's why being 7 and getting the pronouns they, their, them has become so fundamental to my healing, because finally when I look in the mirror and hear people say 7 and they, their, them, I see myself. And I see myself as both male and female, and a beautiful synthesis in the middle. And actually, I'm starting to find it increasingly oppressive when I have to make that choice of either male or female. Obviously, I look much more female, and people assume I'm female all the time. But it's so lovely when you see a kind of all genders bathroom, for example, or when somebody gets my pronouns right, because I feel like they're actually seeing me. They're seeing all of me, and that's beautiful, and that's why this work that we're doing today is so important, so that people feel safe to be themselves. I think lots of cis men and women, have questions and issues around their identification with the gender that they're prescribed. It's very much forcing us into boxes, and boxes aren't healthy for anybody. So I think this is why it's so important that we change this. And in terms of the fashion question, the greatest rock stars in the world, the greatest pop performers, have always blurred the gender dichotomy, and that's always what's made them interesting, is being able to walk between the genders. It's much more interesting than just being in a box and just following the rules.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there are more questions in the audience, but I would just like to ask a quick question. So I've recently read about LGBTI, and so having I as intersex is, the whole political campaign about fighting for the rights of sexual minorities. the people who belong to this community. I just wonder if this term is fair for intersex people, because I feel like intersex issues has been it's been unspeakable for a long time, and it's also more biological, seem to be more fundamental. It involves being homosexual, bisexual, and all that. But
is this Charlotte speaking?
Yes, it's me.
Charlotte, you saved the most controversial question to the very end. Okay, I'm going to give you my answer, and obviously I'm one intersex person. I don't speak for all intersex people. I think I'll talk about my own experience. When I first went to the androgen insensitivity syndrome, it's the first time I met other intersex people. I felt very unwelcome initially because I identified as queer, and I felt that a lot of people had taken on, and this is my perception, but I felt a lot of people had taken on the prejudice and had taken on they'd identified or even over-identified with being pushed into the box, and they were maybe married and adopting children and being straight and not seeing themselves as at all queer and being really threatened by the idea of queer. I think we're starting to move beyond that now, and I think that people like Hida and her book Born Both has been very important for this. And there are more and more intersex activists who are actually saying, you know, if I'm really honest, if I'm really truthful, I do feel non-binary. I can perform the gender of the sex that I've been assigned, and I've had a long history of performing that, but it does feel quite artificial. And but some intersex people do wholly identify with one of those two options, and it's not for any of us to say that that's wrong and that their sexuality is queer. If they feel that they're straight and if they feel that they're a man or a woman, then that's obviously their perception. But of course, in terms of biology, we are both. So who would the Christian church have me marry, for example? You know, as somebody who looks like a woman, got breasts, got a vagina, but had testes, and I've got XY chromosomes. Who would God have me marry? I say to the Christian church. And I think this is why we're so threatening to religion, because actually we prove that God isn't homophobic. We prove that God isn't invested in all of this prejudice. Actually, God loves diversity, and God loves you know, the beauty of humanity in all its shapes, sizes, everything, ages. You know, so we need to move beyond this. And I'm starting to get tired because my brain's stopping to work.
Anyone else want to ask a question?
Yeah. Anyone else?
I have time for one more.
We've lost Laura.
We've lost Ella. Okay.
Thank you guys so much for being here. It's lovely meeting you guys.
Really lovely meeting you. And we really hope, and well, in fact, I know that we're going to get the funding for this film, because how could people not want to fund this film? And we will have to bring it to London, to the National Film Theatre, and we'll have to bring it to the RCA and have a screening with you guys. And thank you so much for being a part of getting this off to such a great start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. And that's all, folks, on Facebook. Thank you for being with us today.